president or ex-president should have immunity from prosecution. Why was this such a win for Donald Trump?
Right. So I think that the big things here is that it actually creates the broad strokes are that unofficial acts are not immune and official acts are at least entitled to what is called a presumption of immunity at a minimum. That is what the Supreme Court says. But these official acts are things that could be construed quite broadly. So, for example, the indictment in D.C. it makes allegations about discussions that Donald Trump had with his Justice Department officials. And here the Supreme Court said, applying their test, that those are acts that are official acts that are absolutely immune. They, however, did say, and I want to mention this because it's really important, although as a general rule, the Supreme Court said that official acts are immune, they said that that immunity could, in some instances, be rebutted by the prosecution. And so when this case gets sent back to the lower court, that court is going to have to determine whether Trump had official acts that he did that are a part of this indictment, and then decide whether or not the government can actually rebut this presumption of immunity by showing that, in fact, prosecuting the conduct that is alleged here would not actually infringe or endanger any of the core executive powers that are enumerated within the Constitution that belong to the presidency. And we could very well have an evidentiary hearing on that. And that means that the prosecution would be able to, for example, present much of the evidence that they would otherwise present at trial. So while it does strip away potentially some of the allegations in this indictment, it doesn't completely do away with the case. It just makes it a little bit harder for prosecutors to bring this case because of what the Supreme Court decided with respect to what evidence has to be taken out.
And of course, there are two other trials pending. Does this decision and also this delay have any bearing on them?
So this decision, I think, actually does have big consequences for these other cases in Fulton County in particular, because although that case is already put on pause because of a separate appellate court decision that is pending in Georgia, many of the allegations in that indictment are very closely related to the allegations in the indictment that is at issue in the Supreme Court opinion. Both cases relate to the election interference in the 2020 election. And again, many of these allegations, for example, the one that I mentioned about communications with Justice Department officials, the pressure campaign against then Vice President Mike Pence, all of those allegations are going to be subject to this opinion, which Trump's counsel in Georgia has a pending immunity motion that is very similar to the one that was the subject of this appeal here by the Supreme Court. With the Mar-a-Lago documents case, which relates to Trump's retention of allegedly classified documents, it's a bit of a different story because much of the conduct there relates to Trump's conduct post-presidency. However, I do think that this still has an impact because in that prosecution, prosecutors in the indictment make many allegations about, for example, statements that Trump made while he was president about his classification authority. They're using many of those things that he was doing while he was president to show intent to retain these classified documents and knowledge that it was wrongful. So I think that that is very important because even in that case, which much of it relates to post-presidency conduct, it still could very well be the case that this opinion has some application because the judge will have to hold a hearing on whether prosecutors can admit evidence of official acts during his presidency to show that intent or knowledge element.
Anna, if Trump becomes president again, can he make all of this go away?
He can with the federal cases. We've never seen a circumstance in which a president has self-pardoned himself, and there's much legal debate about whether or not that is actually something that a president is able to do underneath his pardon power under the United States Constitution. So that is subject to debate, but But however, I will say that it is very likely that Trump will, at the very least, attempt to self-pardon himself, or there's also the option that he could simply direct his attorney general to drop the prosecution, because keep in mind that it's within the executive branch. The attorney general reports to the Department of Justice. Yes, this is an independent special counsel, and there are some very nuanced legal issues here, but it certainly is something that most legal scholars and legal analysts like myself believe that Trump will, either through self-pardoning or through directing the Department of Justice to drop the case, he certainly will try to get these charges at the federal level dropped. On the state charges, it's a bit of a different story. Again, that case is already frozen at this time, and it will be affected by the Supreme Court opinion. Some of those allegations in that indictment will be stripped down. And so it's a bit up in the air in terms of how that case will be affected, but he will not be able to direct that prosecution to be dropped. He will not be able to self-pardon himself because it's a state case, but at the very minimum, that case won't be able to go forward while he is the president of the United States, because I think it's very likely that higher courts, and the Supreme Court included, would find that a state prosecution of a sitting president can't go forward until he is done with his role as the president.